everybody, welcome. My name is Erica Carlson, and I am faculty here in the physics department. And but I have to tell you that the views expressed today are not those of my department, nor are they those of the university. They are my own personal views, although I wish they were the views of the university. I have been a faculty member at Purdue for 9 years now. So I am a physicist, I'm a scientist, which basically means that I study the universe that God created. Okay, the same way that Einstein said it. I want to know the mind of God. That's what I'm seeking after. And I have to tell you a story. When I was a graduate student, so to be a professor in physics, you have to get a PhD in physics first. And you got to do a lot of other things too. But anyway, you got to get that PhD. So I was a graduate student in physics at UCLA. And in one of my courses, the professor invited the whole class over to dinner, which, you know, it's not a huge class, maybe 10 people. And I arrived, you know, this was in Los Angeles, it's big traffic jam all the time, all day, every day. And so I arrived, I was trying to arrive fashionably late, as is the Southern custom, I'm from the South. I arrived unfashionably late because I had to get gas too, and then it was really late. So I showed up at the door, and my professor's wife opened the door, and I was shocked, first of all, because she's shorter than me, and I'm really short. So first of all, okay, she's shorter than me, and she said, "You must be Erica." I thought, well, that was a tough guess. I'm the only woman in the class. I said, "Yes, I am Erica." And she says, "My husband says you're religious." I said, "Well, yes, I am." And she's staring directly into my eyes the whole time, you know, and she said, "Do you believe in creation?" I said, "Yes, I do." And she said, "Do you believe in the Big Bang?" And I said, "Yes, I do." And then she let me in the door. Now, I wish everyone were as candid as she is, because for her, she was expressing something I think a lot of people want to know, which is, how is it that you can be a physicist and a Christian at the same time? And how do you integrate these things? And of course, I have studied that issue a lot. I came to Christ when I was 4 years old, by the way. I did not know about the Big Bang yet when I was 4 years old. So I came to Christ at a very young age. But your faith progresses, your relationship with God progresses. And as I grew older and read things and heard things and learned more things, I began to question myself, how in the world do these things go together? It was clear to me that God was calling me into science or engineering, and yet at the same time I wasn't getting satisfactory answers from my local church about how to meld those two, about how to meld Christianity with science. And so I started reading and thinking and praying and crying and reading and praying, and God is faithful, okay? He provides answers, and I've learned a lot. So for me, my faith has been tremendously strengthened by that experience, and I'm delighted to share what I've learned with other people that strengthened my own faith. Now, in college, I was absolutely delighted to hear a talk by the astronomer Hugh Ross. And he came to our campus and spoke to our Christian fellowship. He's a believer, he's an astronomer and a theologian. And for the first time, I heard somebody give an explanation that was scientifically meticulous and theologically meticulous. This was somebody who really dug into both sides of things and has degrees in both fields and credibility in both fields. And so that was a boon to me as a believer, that I could then read Dr. Ross's books and learn a lot of things. So in fact, just about everything I'll talk about today is heavily influenced by his writings. So there's even, we have volunteers here today who are selling some of Dr. Ross's books. If you're interested in reading more, we've got several books outside, including More Than a Theory, which is basically putting forth the idea that creation as a hypothesis is testable, and that you can test these ideas. Here's a book that I personally love, Why the Universe is the Way It Is. This came up in the debate last night. Why in the world did God create a place where we have evil and suffering? Dr. Ross actually has some very interesting ideas about why God set the physical laws of this current universe the way they are, in such a way to allow a limited expression of evil right now, but he set things up carefully so that we're very limited. We're limited in time, we're limited in space, and things like that. And I think this is a wonderfully interesting book. We have Genesis 1, A Scientific Perspective, which is a pamphlet that will go basically into detail about what I'll talk about today. All of these are being sold at very discounted prices. There's also some free brochures. So anyway, if you want to dig into this more, there'll be a table right out in the hallway here, staffed by volunteers. So let's get down to brass tacks. In the beginning. First page of the Bible. If you have a Bible with you, don't believe a word I say, turn to your Bible and check me up on it, or open up your iPod or iPad and get on Purdue's Wi-Fi and check it out. The first page of the Bible, Genesis 1, says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, there's a lot there in this verse. In the beginning, okay, it's making the claim that something started. There was a beginning to something. A beginning to what? God created the heavens and the earth. Now, what language is this originally written in? It's not originally written in English, right? It's originally written in Hebrew, okay? Now, here's the thing about the Bible, right? It's been translated into many different languages. In fact, as English speakers, we have many different translations we can choose from. In any translation you read, the main point of a passage will come across for sure. The main point of this passage, we're going to read Genesis 1. The main point of this passage is that God made you special and He loves you very much. Okay? I get that from VeggieTales. You didn't recognize the reference. That's the main point of it, and that'll come across in any language you read it. But we're going to dig into some of the scientific details today, and one of the things that I, as a scientist, love about this passage is that it's gutsy. I mean, this passage is thousands of years old, and it makes some specific, detailed statements about natural events that we, in our current time period, are now able to go back and test those statements to see if they're correct. Okay, so for that reason, I love this text, the depth of it and the detail. Okay, so it's originally in Hebrew. We're going to get into the details, so I have to speak a little bit about Hebrew. So when you see heavens plural plus earth singular in the Hebrew, it's a bit like a compound word. In the English, right, if I told you there's some butter on the table, okay, you might think, great, I am going to toast some toast and get myself a knife and spread that butter on my toast. If I told you there was a fly on the table, you're not going to head in the same direction. You're going to go for the fly swatter, right? What if I told you there was a butterfly on the table? You might say, oh, I think I'll look at that, okay? So butter, not fly, but butterfly is something new, right? In the same way in Hebrew, this phrase, heavens plural plus earth singular, means something new. It means the world. It just means what is. It means the entire physical universe is kind of how a modern reader would think of that. So in the beginning, God created the universe. The word create here, by the way, is a very special word. It's bara in the Hebrew. It means something that only God can do. So only God can bara something into existence. It means to create something entirely new that's never existed before. So in the beginning, God did something only He can do. He brought something entirely new into existence, never existed before, which is our universe. Now, step back. What does modern science have to say about that? Well, I want you to know that in the past 100 years, there's been a scientific revolution about how scientists think about the universe. Okay? If you go back to the beginning of the 20th century, last century, yeah. If you go back to the beginning of the 20th century, scientists thought that the universe had always existed. They thought the universe was eternal. Okay? Now, they didn't have evidence for that. It turned out to be rooted in philosophical beliefs from a few centuries earlier. Nevertheless, at the beginning of the 20th century, that was just sort of the reigning idea that the universe was eternal, had always existed. Now, something that is eternal and has always existed doesn't have a beginning, and in fact doesn't have a creator. There's no need for a creator if it's always existed. Okay? As Dr. Craig was talking about last night, it's not a contingent object if it's always been there. So, in the 20th century, though, there was a revolution in scientific thinking. There was the development of general relativity that Einstein put forward, and then, coupled with Einstein's theory of general relativity, there were observations, astronomical observations. So Edwin Hubble had a very powerful telescope and was observing the heavens, and he saw that in every direction we look, stuff is moving away from us out there. Okay? If we look in that direction, galaxies are moving away from us. We look over there, galaxies are moving away. We look on the other side of the Earth down there, galaxies are moving away from us. And in fact, the farther away the galaxy, the faster it's moving away from us. Let me do a demonstration real quick. Okay, let's do this up ahead of time. Da, 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 da. Alright, you can tell I don't play a wind instrument, otherwise that would have been easy. Pretend this is the universe. This is the universe blue. Okay, I'm going to put stars on it, okay? And galaxies, and oh, that's a terrible looking galaxy. Anyway, I'm just putting stuff here on the universe balloon, alright? And maybe there's a planet and a galaxy there, and a nebula, and maybe here's the Horsehead Nebula. Okay. Now, what we observe is not this, actually. We observe the opposite. We observe something that's expanding, okay? So, watch real close what happens to my stars and galaxies, okay? You see how close together the stars and galaxies are right now, right? And then as I blow it up, what's going to happen to the stars and galaxies? They're going to get closer together or farther apart? Farther apart, okay. Excellent. Your prediction was confirmed. The stars and galaxies got farther apart, okay? Now, what about the stars and galaxies that are not right next to each other, but far apart from each other, okay? Think about how fast things move away from each other as I blow up this balloon, right? The ones that are right next to each other move away at a certain rate, okay? The ones that are farther away from each other, think about what you expect. You expect them to move away from each other faster than the ones that are close by, or slower than the ones that are close by, okay? You can kind of watch. Okay, what do you expect? Okay, yeah, the ones that are farther apart on the balloon move away from each other faster than the ones that are close together, okay? So that's actually what we observe in the universe. We observe that the things that are, everything's moving away from us, and the stuff that's farther away moves away even faster. So it's very much like the balloon when it's expanding, okay? So it means we have an expanding universe. And in the 20th century, a mathematical physicist, George Lemaitre, who also happened to be a Jesuit priest, bully for the Jesuits, mathematical physicist George Lemaitre put these two things together. He said, look, we have the observation that the universe is expanding. We also have Einstein's theory of general relativity. He added the two together and he said, this means we had a beginning, okay? He said, if you run that backwards in time, much like when I let the air out of the balloon, if you run this backward in time, it all goes back to a single teeny tiny point, which physicists and mathematicians call a singularity. We just mean a teeny tiny point, okay? So that was a bold prediction to make, given that the reigning theory at the time was that the universe had always existed and that it was infinite in extent, okay? So, as you might imagine, scientists fought the idea tooth and nail. Nobody liked it, okay? Einstein didn't like it at first. In fact, famous physicist Sir Arthur Eddington, actually, they didn't hide their disgust for this idea either, okay? Sir Arthur Eddington wrote in the journal Nature. Anybody heard of the journal Nature? Mm-hmm. I would like to publish someday in the journal Nature, okay? It's the creme de la creme. So Sir Arthur Eddington wrote, the idea of a beginning to the present order of things is philosophically repugnant to me. I should genuinely like to find a loophole, okay? He didn't hide his bias. He put his bias on the table. Now, here's the thing though. The scientific method works. Even though, and he wasn't alone. I mean, this idea was fought tooth and nail, okay? So the scientific method works. The scientific method, in a nutshell, being have an idea, test it against data. Refine the idea, test it again against more data, okay? And your idea gets closer and closer and closer to the truth in an iterative fashion like that. The scientific method works, okay? So despite the biases against this idea of the beginning of the universe, in fact, it's been confirmed observationally, okay? It is now universally accepted among physicists that in fact the Big Bang is what happened, okay? That is how our universe, the universe as we know it, had its beginning, is in the Big Bang event. Complete paradigm shift and overturning of the thinking. And really it was only in 1992 that the last piece of evidence came in for that really sealed the deal for everybody. It was basically, if anybody's heard of the cosmic background radiation, anybody heard of that? There's a temperature background to the universe, okay? Kind of like if the Big Bang was like an explosion, there was heat generated, okay? Heat involved in that. This is the leftover heat from the Big Bang, okay? And so we have careful observations of that. And what people were looking for was very tiny variations in that. And they measured those variations and they said, okay, fine, that is what we expected. The Big Bang must have happened. And at the time, in fact, the astronomers who made the discovery were very forthcoming and forthright about the theological implications of their discovery. They knew the theological implications of their discovery. One astronomer came on night one with Ted Koppel, and Ted Koppel quoted Genesis 1, verses 1 and 2. You saw the theological implications. The astronomer, from memory, quoted verse 3, okay? So they all knew the theological implications, and in fact, astronomers at the time, some of them came to faith in Christ as a result of this paradigm shift, this idea that the universe had a beginning. Everybody knows that if it had a beginning, there must have been a beginner. So that's the connection there. Let's move on. And everybody's thinking, is she going to spend 20 minutes on every verse? No, just the first verse. Okay. The second verse is, and the earth was formless and void, and darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the surface of the waters. There's also a lot tied into this verse. First of all, we should notice that verse 2 starts off, and the earth. Okay? So verse 1 was about the whole physical universe, the earth, the heavens and the earth together. Heavens plural plus earth singular in the Hebrew meaning the physical universe. Verse 1 is about everything. Verse 2 is only about the earth. And the earth was formless and void, and darkness was over the surface of the deep. So, something that, one of the reasons I titled this talk God's Lab Notebook is because this document is structured very much like a scientific account, okay? I have certainly, in my education, I had to write a lot of lab reports, but then in my capacity as an instructor, I've graded a lot of lab reports, and there are certain things I look for. This one gets an A+, as far as the structure is concerned. Now, one of the reasons we have students write down their laboratory methods is so that the experiment can be repeated. I don't expect anyone to repeat God's experiment. Nevertheless, he's written us a very orderly account. So in verse 2, what's happening? And the earth was formless and void, and darkness was over the surface of the deep. This is a statement of the initial conditions of the earth. Okay, the initial conditions of the earth before God started preparing it for life and before he started introducing life on it. So what are those initial conditions? The earth was formless and void. The Hebrew there is tohu vavohu. So tohu means a wasteland, emptiness. In the context of the passage, you can take it to mean devoid of life and unfit for life. Tohu vavohu. I discussed this passage with my good friend who's a Messianic Jew and a professor of Hebrew Bible and comparative Semitic apology. And she said that tohu vavohu, the vohu doesn't have a meaning on its own. You only see it with tohu. So tohu vavohu. She said it just rhymed for emphasis. It's like saying waste schmaced. So there you go. There's her interpretation of tohu vavohu. The earth was waste schmaced. And darkness was over the surface of the deep. Okay? Well, the deep is waters. So it's saying here that the surface of the earth was blanketed in water, okay? And that it was dark. Let me ask you this question right away. If it says, and darkness was over the surface of the deep, where is the darkness? Okay? And the earth was formless and void, and darkness was over the surface of the deep. Where is it dark? Where is the passage saying it's dark?
Down at the surface.
Down at the surface. So that's an extremely important thing to notice, okay? That the passage is only making a statement about darkness being over the surface of the deep. It's stating that it's dark on the surface of the earth. It's just not making a statement about the rest of the universe, okay? Sometimes we want to say, oh, it was dark everywhere. Well, we don't know that from the passage, okay? The passage is just saying it was dark on the surface of the earth. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the surface of the waters. this is fantastic as well, okay? The Spirit of God was hovering over the surface of the waters. What this tells you, okay, since the only person who could give an account of this would be God, would be the Creator. It's telling you the vantage point from which He's giving you the account. He's saying, the Spirit of God, I am hovering over the surface of the waters. This is extremely important for interpreting what else is stated in the passage, okay? So, and this is the idea of point of view. So this is, again, part of why it's such a well-structured document scientifically. Point of view, the observations that you write down, the descriptions you give, depend on the point of view that you have. Here's an example, okay? Right now, my point of view, that I'm standing here and I'm facing this direction, okay? The room is full of people. Right now, my point of view is that I'm facing the other direction. And from this vantage point, I don't see anybody else in here. So if you guys are quiet, my observation would have to be, I don't see anybody, okay? It's just very different, right? Or if I were really brave and did a handstand over here, you know, you would say that I was upside down, but from my vantage point, you're upside down on the ceiling, okay? Or another example of this is how many people have seen the sunset? Anybody seen the sunset? Okay. How many people have seen the sunrise? A smaller set, probably. Yes. Okay. Now, did you have any problem with my description of the sunrises and sunsets? No, that's what it looks like from the point of view of an observer on planet Earth. We observe that the sun rises and the sun sets. Now we also know that if you had a different point of view, you would describe it differently. Okay, if you're looking at planetary models and you put yourself outside of the solar system and you look at it, you'd have a different description. You'd say, oh no, what's really causing that is that the Earth is spinning on its axis, and when you're on the side that faces the sun, you see light, and when you're on the side facing away from the sun, you see dark. Okay? But that description is tied to the location of the observer. Okay? And if our location point is on the surface of the Earth, nobody has any problem with us saying that the sun rises and the sun sets. That is a correct description from this vantage point. And another way to just get this absolutely completely clear is to think of point of view as being the camera angle. That's how our modern society would really think of it. It's the camera angle, right? We're used to watching movies. We know what the camera angle is. That's the location of the camera, right? Okay. So again, if I have a camera located on the surface of the Earth, that camera would record that the sun rises and then the sun sets, okay? So point of view is tremendously important. So the point of view, the camera angle of this passage is the surface of the Earth. So you have to remember then that in interpreting the rest of the events, remember that the video camera is stuck on the surface of the Earth, okay? Now, we as modern readers, as a space-faring generation who has sent people to the moon and is talking about sending people to Mars, without thinking about it, we inadvertently place ourselves outside the solar system when reading this passage, okay? And that's just because of the way we were taught. We were all taught to think about the solar system from the point of view of looking at those little solar system models that they showed you in elementary school. Just keep that in mind, though, that that's a very 20th and 21st century view of things, okay? And this passage says the description will be told, that the account will be recounted from the point of view of an observer on the surface. Okay, now, was the Earth originally dark and wet? Let's see, what does science have to say about that? According to planetary formation models, okay, how did the solar system form? First of all, I'm not an astronomer. I work on materials and the electronic properties of materials. That's my area of research. So let me tell you a slightly outsider's view of the planetary formation models. Think of a dust cloud, okay? The dust cloud, the particles attract each other due to gravity, okay? Also, if there's any rotation, then that rotation just gets intensified as the things come together. So this is very much like pizza dough. That's my pizza dough model of the planetary formation, okay? Pizza dough is sticky, it sticks together, and yet we've all got these pictures in our heads of the great Italian cook spinning the pizza dough out, right? So it sticks together and yet it's spinning, and what happens is that it spins itself out flat. Okay, so our solar system is on a plane, and then the little planets clump up after that. When there's enough density in the middle, the sun ignites nuclear fusion, right? And these planets are also just forming little clumps. They're forming out of clumps of dust out there in the rest of the solar system. Now, they're all formed out of dust, right? So, when the Earth first forms, okay, according to planetary formation models, there's all this dust between us and the sun, okay? So much dust, in fact, that light from the sun would not be able to penetrate to the surface of the Earth, okay? That's one reason to expect it to be dark on the surface of the Earth. The other reason, scientifically, to expect it to be dark on the Earth originally is that, in fact, Earth's original atmosphere, we don't have Earth's original atmosphere, we lost it. Earth's original atmosphere was a lot thicker, okay? We should have had an atmosphere very much like Venus. And what scientists now believe is that what radically altered our atmosphere was when we captured the moon. The moon, it did not form simultaneously with the Earth. Turns out that the moon is a little bit younger than the Earth, okay? The Earth dates to 4.58 billion years. The moon dates to about 4.25 billion years. So it was a later event. And the stuff is different, right? We did send Neil Armstrong. We're very proud of Neil Armstrong at Purdue, right? Since he's at Purdue alone, we sent him out there. He brought back some rocks. We tested them and said, different, okay? So what we now believe happened is that the moon was a capture event. The moon's pretty big too, okay? So imagine an object, roughly the size of the moon, barreling towards the Earth. They didn't have a head-on collision clearly, but they kind of had a grazing collision, okay? And this was devastating for the Earth and the moon, and they kind of smooshed around a little bit, and then the moon and the Earth reformed out of that. In the process, it blew away a lot of our atmosphere. So that is one reason that we think that the atmosphere, that our current atmosphere is so much less dense than it originally should have been. But all that's to say that there are two reasons, excuse me, scientifically speaking, that the Earth would have been dark at first, even though the sun's already shining. There's the interplanetary dust, and there's the very thick atmosphere. And we also know that the Earth originally was covered in water. We know that simply from the chemistry of the continental land masses. Okay, again, I'm not a chemist, but what the chemists tell us from analyses of the continental land masses is that they formed underwater, actually, and then plate tectonics pushed them up. So that's also consistent with the scientific record. So we've gotten so far, okay, and it is a very scientific description. There's been a frame of reference established. That is, we know the camera angle is on the surface of the Earth, and the initial conditions of the Earth have been fully described. Well, described, okay? And it's dark and wet. And now we're going to get a chronological description of events. This is exactly what we would tell you to do in your lab notebook if you're taking a lab course at Purdue. We want to know, what did it start off as, and then what did you do, and in what order, okay? And then what are your conclusions? So we'll start here in verse 3, okay? Verse 3 says, "Then God said, let there be light, and there was light. And God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, one day." Okay, so this is the description of day one. So it says, let there be light, okay, and there was light. Now, let there be light. The point of the light is to replace the darkness. Where was the darkness, according to the passage? Yes, the passage said in verse 2 that the darkness was on the surface of the Earth. The purpose of light is to replace the darkness. It's replacing the darkness on the surface of the Earth. So the light that it's talking about here is about light on the surface of the Earth. Okay, we know that partly because it told us where it was dark on the surface. Now it's going to be light on the surface. We know that partly because the camera angle is on the surface of the Earth. Okay, so again, imagine what you would see from the point of view of this camera. First it's dark, and then you see that it becomes a little bit lighter. Okay, was this the clearing of the interplanetary dust? Was this the capture of the moon event? Was it after both happened? I don't know, but it's consistent with that scientific understanding. Do you have any questions so far?
got
Okay.
a question, I guess.
Pardon?
I just wondered if, I don't believe the moon was captured, but if it was, I would not expect a circular orbit.
Oh, no orbits are actually circular.
Well,
They're
I
close.
mean, a near circular orbit.
Yeah.
I would expect to capture them
Well,
to have a quite
Yeah.
elliptical orbit.
yeah,
Anyway, that's all I have to say.
okay. I mean, I'm not sure. I didn't do the simulations myself, but several groups have run the simulations of what they expected, and they all basically agree that that's how we captured the moon. There's a great PBS special on this. Actually, I think it was a NOVA special, where it's interviewing several different scientists who kind of participated in figuring this out, how the moon was captured. But actually, what I've told you is the end of my knowledge of it. So if you want more depth, I'll have to refer you to that special with the original scientific papers. Yeah, good question. Excellent. Other questions so far? Okay. All right. Okay, so day two starts in verse 6. Then God said, "Let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters." And God made the expanse, and separated the waters which were below the expanse from the waters which were above the expanse, and it was so. And God called the expanse heaven, and there was evening and there was morning, a second day. So this is day 2. This is not a very controversial day to interpret. This is almost universally interpreted as the beginning of the water cycle. That basically what's going on is that the waters above are the clouds, the waters below are rivers, streams, oceans, ponds, things like that. And then basically this is a water cycle. Now, from a scientific perspective, that's a perfect order of events, because we have the light penetrating down to the surface of the earth. And what is it that kicks off the water cycle, right? It's evaporation due to the light rays of the sun. And so it's a perfect order of events. First the light penetrates down, and then it starts the evaporation water cycle. You have a question?
Yeah. From a little bit earlier, it was talking about where there was light and darkness, and then God separated the light from the darkness. Would that be if the earth would start spinning at that point in time? Or I was wondering if you have an idea for how I'm assuming like the removal of the atmosphere maybe allows the light to come in, and then for separating it, would at some point the earth start spinning, or what would do you think the physical mechanism for that separation would be?
God separated the light from the darkness. I mean, you're making a good point that we understand that basically what that means is it's the spinning of the earth. I don't think you can argue from the passage that it's saying that the rotation began then, okay? Because let's say that the rotation was already in process, which would be what you expect scientifically. Let's say the rotation was already in process, but it was dark, right?
Yeah.
And then you have to imagine that a lot of this is a gradual process. That the moon event is traumatic, but the interplanetary dust clearing away, which happens because of the solar wind, but when the solar wind is really pushing it out, that would be a gradual process. So you would gradually go from complete darkness to having a little bit of light and just very slowly turn on, and you'd have to imagine that the earth is spinning, okay? And then as the light gets brighter, you get more and more of a contrast between dark and light. So I don't see a contradiction. I don't think you can argue that it means that the spinning started.
So more change from kind of like a hazy type of brightness to like, as it clears up, the light doesn't sort of transfer all the way around in the cloud of dust.
Yeah, I would look at it much more as an atmospheric change.
All right.
Atmospheric and interplanetary dust change, absolutely. Yes, question here.
Do you believe these days that are being described here, that is creation, do you believe they are a literal 24-hour period, or are you interpreting this as something more than that?
Okay, fantastic question. What do the days mean? What do the days mean? Let me tell you one thing real quick, because one of the reasons people care about the length of the days is because they want to know how old does the passive state of the Earth is, and how old does the passive state of the universe is, right? So one thing you should notice about the passage, and again, don't take my word for it, read it for yourself, is that it's highly structured, and there's a lot of parallelism in the passage, okay? It's a highly structured document. Every day begins with, then God said, let there be, stop. The stuff happens, and there was evening and there was morning the first day. Then God said, let there be, stop. The stuff happens, and there was evening and there was morning the second day. very parallel for 6 days in a row. The seventh day is completely different, has none of those phrases in it. But what that means is that because it's so strictly parallel, you know when the first day begins. Day 1 begins in verse 3 with the phrase, then God said, let there be light. Okay? So in fact, when did the universe come into existence? It was already there in verse 1. When does it talk about the earth? The earth was already there in verse 2. And the days don't begin until verse 3. So independent of how you want to translate the word day, independent of what you think that means, the passage makes no statement. I just want to be really clear about this. The passage makes no statement about how old the universe is or how the earth is. It just doesn't say. Now, it's still an important question though, how long are the days, right? Still matters. So in translating from Hebrew into the English, we have to keep in mind that biblical Hebrew has a few thousands of words in it. Modern English has a million or more, okay? So there's not a one-to-one mapping, it's a one-to-many mapping. So what are your literal options, right? Day, so the original Hebrew here is Yom. You've heard of Yom, if you know anybody, if you see on your calendar, you have your Jewish background, maybe you celebrate Yom Kippur, okay, that means Day of Atonement, so Yom is the word that's there. There are a few literal interpretations, literal translations from that word into the English, okay? One literal translation is 12 hours, roughly the 12 hours of daylight, okay? And in fact, that's used in the passage when it talks about God separating the day from the night. It's the same word Yom, and it's roughly the 12-hour period. Another literal interpretation is 24 hours, okay? And the Jews would count that from evening to evening. We would count it from midnight to midnight. They would count it from sunset to sunset. Another literal interpretation of Yom is an era or an epoch. And it's the idea of a long time period that has a definite beginning and a definite end. And that is actually a literal interpretation. And in fact, a literal translation. And in fact, if Moses wanted to write down the idea of 6 consecutive eras, he chose the only word he had available, which was Yom. Now, that's, okay, so I'm not saying what I think, but you can make up your own mind as to which is the right one to choose. But in fact, to really disentangle that is a long discussion. So I'm more than happy to go over all the arguments one way or the other with you afterwards if you like. But that's just kind of a teaser of some of the quick arguments to think about. Good questions. Okay, so let's see. We have day 1, light hits the surface of the earth. Day 2, the water cycle happens. Day 3, okay. Day 3 starts in verse 9. And then God said, let the waters below the heavens be gathered into one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering of the waters he called seas, and God saw that it was good. Then God said, let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees bearing fruit after their kind, with seed in them on the earth, and it was so. And the earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed after their kind, and trees bearing fruit with seed in them after their kind. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning the third day. So the first thing that happens, then God said, let there be, is let the waters be gathered and let the dry land appear. So first thing that happens in this day is dry land, so the continental land masses are happening. The next thing that happens is plants. And the Hebrew here is actually pretty simple. Let the earth sprout vegetation. It says deshe deshah, which is basically deshe being the plants, deshah, doing what plants do, right? Let the vegetation vegetate. So vegetation vegetates on the land masses. That's of course, according to what we understand scientifically, that makes great sense because, what do plants need, right? Plants need soil, okay? They need water and they need sunlight. And all 3 of those are in place in the passage before the plants are discussed. I'm actually very familiar with this as someone who was very good at killing plants in my office, not on purpose, but accidentally when I forget to water them or I don't leave them close enough to their window, or in the case of a plant I have right now that's so old, I think it ate all of its soil. It's just all roots in there. So it's all making good sense. Now, that's going to bring us to verse 14. Okay, and I have to tell you, verse 14, which is going to start day number 4. Day number 4 is the hardest to interpret, so we're going to spend some time digging into day number 14. So let me read it for you, and then we'll look at it. So then God said, let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night. Let there be for signs and for seasons and for days and years. Let there be for lights in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth. And it was so. And God made the two great lights, the greater light to govern the day, and the lesser light to govern the night. He made the stars also. And God placed them in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth, and to govern the day and the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning, the fourth day. So this is discussing the sun, moon, and stars, okay? Sometimes people wonder, why didn't you just say sun and moon? It says the greater light and the lesser light. There's a good theological reason for that. At the time, the word for the sun was synonymous with the sun god, the name of the sun god. The name for the moon was the name of the moon god. So the passage is making the extremely important statement of, these aren't things that are named personalities. These are physical objects created by God. So it's a philosophical, theological statement to simply call them the greater light and the lesser light. Now, okay, so the sun, moon, and stars are appearing. We have to remember, okay, our camera angle, okay, is from the point of view of someone on the surface of the earth. So all we can really say from the passage is that this is the time period when, according to this camera, which is stuck on the surface of the earth, it can look left, right, up, down. When this camera looks up, it wasn't able to see the sun, moon, and stars before, and now it can see the sun, moon, and stars. Okay? So let's keep that idea in the back of our head, that that's really all the passage is saying. Now, there's other textual clues in here as to how to interpret this day. Okay? There's several purposes that are listed in day 4 for the sun, moon, and stars. Several purposes, but let me highlight some of them, okay? One of the purposes is to separate the day from the night, okay? Another is to give light on the earth. Another is to govern the day and the night, okay? Another is to, well, it repeats itself, to give light on the earth, to govern the day and the night, to separate the light from the darkness. Okay, so it's repeating itself within the day, but also, does anybody detect an echo? Because these purposes have already been discussed in the passage, okay? To give light on the earth, that was already discussed in the passage earlier than this day. To separate the day from the night, that was already discussed earlier in this passage. To separate the light from the darkness, that was already discussed earlier in this passage. All of these purposes were already accomplished in day 1, okay? So in day 1, it said, let there be light, and there was light. And God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. So on day 1, he already gave light on the earth. Okay? On day 1, he already separated the light from the darkness. And since he called the light day and the darkness night, that means he already separated the day from the night. So he already did all those purposes. He already accomplished all those things in day 1. In day 4, the writer is basically doing everything they can to say, watch this clue, this is parallel to day 1. These are the things that God made that accomplished the purposes back in day 1. It's the sun, moon, and stars that he made in order to accomplish this purpose of giving light on the earth, separating the light from the darkness, and separating the day from the night. Okay? Now, why would God create something on day 4 to do things he already did on day 1? I would argue that it's because this day is not about the creation of those objects. This is the day when you see them in the sky, okay? Because it says, let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens. So they're appearing. Let there appear is a more accurate, I would say, translation. So this is the day when our camera angle views the sun, moon, and stars. Now, I'm going to meet someone in the audience who's cowering. What's your name? Hi.
Abby.
Abby, my name's Erica. Abby, where were you born? Indiana? Okay. She was just born. Oh my goodness. No, that's not the right thing to think, is it? I was born in Alabama, by the way. So we just met each other, right? And when we first meet, that's in somewhat appropriate time, maybe, to discuss things about yourself, okay? Well, upon a first meeting, you might give a little bit of background history. That's what's going on in the passage. This is the first time in the passage that the camera has seen the sun, moon, and stars. That's the appropriate time to give the backstory. The backstory of the sun, moon, and stars is that God made them in a place in the sky. And that's actually what it says in verses 16 and 17. Think of those as a parenthetical backstory. God made the two great lights, and God placed them in the sky. Okay? Now, you're thinking, well, why isn't it clearer? Why wouldn't it, I mean, we in English, we could write this clearer, right? We could say something like, God had made these things, and God had placed them in the sky. We have a verb tense we could switch to, which would say, this didn't just happen, okay? As in like, I was born yesterday or I was born just now. We have a verb tense we could switch to, which would be God had made them or had placed them. Turns out the Hebrew language just doesn't have that many verb tenses. Biblical Hebrew doesn't. It's got 3 verb tenses available to it. The perfect, the imperfect, and the imperative. Perfect would be completed action, either completed just now, I was just born, or I was born in the distant past, so it covers everything completed. Imperfect is uncompleted, as in I'm doing it right now or I will do it in the future. Imperative is, hey, sit down, okay? So it's using the perfect tense, it's using completed, but it doesn't, there's no, it could not have switched some verb tense to make it clear. I'm just trying to say that in English we could write this clearer, but in Hebrew you couldn't. The best the author could do would be to give you all these parallel clues and say, look, this is the thing that God made the sun, moon, and stars to do these purposes. And all of those purposes that are repeated were all accomplished back in day one. So I would argue that this verse here is simply, again, another atmospheric change. Okay? What's the atmospheric change that's happening now? Let's think scientifically about what was going on in the passage. Day 3 had plants. Okay? What do plants do to the atmosphere? Yeah, carbon dioxide and oxygen. They play with this stuff. Plants do carbon sequestration, right? So plants remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. They put out oxygen. So plants remove greenhouse gases. They, once plants were introduced on the earth, it can shift the chemistry of the atmosphere from one that's basically translucent, okay? Like if you have one of those showers that has the frosted glass, that's translucent, okay? Light gets through, but it doesn't come through with crystal clarity. Transparent lets light through with crystal clarity. So this is an atmospheric change from translucent to transparent, brought about probably by the plants, okay? Probably by the plants. Yeah, I mean, you've experienced that, right? I mean, I'm from the, like I said, I'm from the South, and one of the days that I almost saw the sunrise, we were talking about have you seen the sunrise and set. One day in high school, I set out to see the sunrise. I did. I was on the phone with my friend. It must have been summer, okay? And we were thinking, hey, let's just stay up and talk all night and see the sunrise. And our major mistake was that it's Georgia, and in Georgia, you get, I mean, weeks at a time where it's just haze. So on that particular day, we did not see the sunrise. All we saw was this gradual transformation from dark to lighter and lighter and lighter. So what a disappointment. Anyway, that's an example of what the atmosphere would be like early in this passage, all the time, just hazy, okay? And then later on, a cleared up atmosphere would allow you to see the sun and the stars. Let me go on and finish 5 and 6. We'll summarize and then I'll open it up to more questions. Day 5 begins in verse 20. Then God said, let the waters teem with swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth in the open expanse of the heavens. And God created the great sea monsters and every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarmed after their kind, and every winged bird after its kind, and God saw that it was good. And God blessed them, saying, be fruitful and multiply, fill the waters and the seas, and let birds multiply on the earth. And there was evening, and there was morning, a 5th day. So it's talking about birds, it's talking about sea critters. The Hebrew surrounding this includes the Hebrew word nephesh. Nephesh in your English translation gets translated as living creatures. Nephesh means soulish, okay? So sometimes it's used for I, self, soul, but it also refers to a class of animals, okay? The class of animals being soulish animals. Now, we separate animals into, birds and mammals and reptiles and things like that. the Hebrews separated animals into nephesh animals and non-nephesh animals. Nephesh animals mean soulless animals that have a personality, meaning they display mind, will, and emotions. Okay? Basically, to compare it to our modern categorizations, that would be birds and mammals. Okay? Or another way to think of it is animals that have the capacity to bond with human beings, birds and mammals. So, anybody here have a pet? Had a pet in the past? Know somebody who had a pet? Okay, so cats and dogs and birds and things like that, those are nephesh animals, right? I mean, if you have a cat or a dog, you know they display intelligence, okay? Maybe cats display a little more intelligence. I have a cat. They definitely display a will, right? It can be very strong-willed at times. They definitely display emotions, right? The dog is always just loving you, and the cat's emotion is basically indifference or hatred. If you've had a bird, you know the bird also can bond with you. I have a friend who had a baby owl, and when she first got it, she just carried it on her shoulder for 2 weeks because she needed to bond with it. So the owl was bonding with her. If you've had a reptilian pet, you know they're a little bit different, right? I had turtles for pets. I loved my turtles, but the turtle never, when it saw me coming, it never wagged its tail slowly, as turtles would do. It never slowly wagged its turtle tail and said, "Oh, I love you." You know, I just never did that. I mean, it would eat the things that I fed it, whether it was bugs or lettuce or whatever, but it didn't care whether it was me feeding it or my brother, or it just found it along the way. So anyway, that's what the nephesh is about. It's about birds and mammals. So the sea critters being described actually are mammals. So think flipper, okay? So think birds and flipper, dolphins, things like that. Day 6 should be our favorite day, okay? So day 6 begins in verse 24. Let the earth bring forth living creatures. That's the nephesh again. So it's talking again about a class of animals. After their kind, cattle, creeping things, beasts of the earth after their kind. These are all basically four-legged mammals that interact with humans. In verse 26, then God said, "Let us make mankind in our image, according to our likeness. And let them rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." And God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. And God blessed them and said, "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over every living thing that moves on the earth." Goes on a little bit more, but basically this is the part of the passage that says humans are special, okay? We're made in the image of God. Male and female are made in the image of God. Gosh, y'all, I gotta tell you, to include females in the image of God is unique among ancient religions, okay? Typically women and men were made out of different stuff. So here that's unique. So this is the part that basically said God made you special and he loves you very much, and that was on the 6th day. Now we're running out of time. We can go into more depth afterwards. The 7th day is very different. The 7th day says, "Thus the heavens and the earth were completed, and all their hosts. And by the 7th day, God completed his work which he had done, and he ceased from his work on the 7th day from all his work which he had done." Now, here's what's amazing. There were a lot of statements in there about what happened in what order, okay? Altogether, if you were keeping track, there were 11 statements about what happened and in what order. Now, we got some Purdue scientists and engineers in here. What are the chances, let's say that I give you 11 things, okay? And let's say you're Moses writing this passage down thousands of years ago. You have to remember that thousands of years ago, culture did not know what this order of events was scientifically. They didn't have the tools we have today, okay? So, if I give this to you thousands of years ago and I say, write this down in the right order, what are the odds that you would get 11 things in the right order with no prior knowledge? You guys know how to calculate it, scientists and engineers? Get your little calculator out and ask from alpha, that sort of thing, okay? So what you do is the chances are 11 times 10 times 9. It's like I have a bag of 11 things. There's 11 ways to pull out the first thing, 10 ways to pull out the next thing, so it's 11 times 10. 9 ways to pull out the next thing, 11 times 10 times 9. Altogether, it's 40 million different ways that I can arrange 11 different objects. Now, that's pretty impressive to me, okay? But the first page of the Bible is that gutsy to list 11 verifiable events, that is, things that we know in our culture have the scientific technology to test, that gets them in the right order, there's a 1 in 40 million chance of getting those things in the right order just by pure luck, okay? For me, when I see a 1 in 40 million chance in a thousands of years old ancient document, that gives me chill bumps, okay? That says to me that Moses had a little bit of help writing the passage, okay? And I would argue that, in fact, he had help from the Creator in crafting this passage. I know I gave you some pennies to flip. We're kind of running out of time. I just want to take questions. This is like flipping a coin 25 times and getting, heads every single time. And if we were to play the penny flipping game, basically, if you flipped it and you even went to 7 in a row, right, we would all kind of want to pay close attention and see what was going on and make sure you weren't cheating, that sort of thing. I did actually have that happen with a younger audience. It turned out that, lo and behold, out of the audience, 7 junior high boys could make their thing come up heads as long as they wanted. So anyway, I learned a lot that day about probabilities. But anyway, when you see something going against the probabilities, as I detected that day with the junior high boys, you know something's going on. Okay, so that's what I would argue, is that something's going on in this passage. Passages from the Creator. So I'll end there, and let's take questions. We have plenty of time for questions. Looks like we have about 15 minutes. You have a question?
Yeah, I'm just curious as to what your opinion is then on evolution and if that can fit in at all. Because I do know that there are people who are Christians who still hold the view they believe in evolution. Just I know sometimes I've heard like they believe, well, evolution occurred and then God stepped in, kind of like the resurrection in history and created man a little different, like us a little differently. Like, what do you think?
Okay, so first of all, disclaimer, I'm not a biologist. I do think the evolution question is a question for the biologist. But as a Christian, what I care about is, well, what's in the scriptures? And actually, it's just not giving us a lot of detail. It says who did it, right? This passage has a lot to say about who did it and why he did it. Who did it is God. Why he did it is because he loved us. It also tells us a lot about in what order he did it. It doesn't really tell us at all how he did it. So in fact, the passage isn't, in my mind, addressing this issue. It's a question for the biologist. And if you ask, practicing biologists who are publishing in biological journals and really have the credibility, and who are also Christians, you'll find basically a couple of main viewpoints. And one of them is the theistic evolution viewpoint, that basically evolution is just how God did it, okay? And the other major viewpoint would be something along the lines of progressive creationism, which would be the idea that the timescales that are documented in the fossil record are correct. That is, all this stuff happened over billions and billions of years, and there was slow change in the species over time, but the way that it came about was that every new species that appears in the fossil record is a special creation event by God. It's really up to the biologists to figure out if they can test those two hypotheses, because it's biological details. Now, the theistic evolutionists might have a challenge from theology in that there is a very special creation word listed for Adam and Eve. Okay, it's Adam. When Adam is created, the word used for the creation of mankind is bara. It's that special word that only God can do. Okay, and that it was used at the beginning of the universe. God bara the physical universe. I didn't point it out, but it was used again in the creation of the nephesh creatures. So the first time the nephesh creatures are mentioned, that was a bara event. The onset of personality, mind, will, and emotions was a new thing that had never been there. And then with Adam, it's a bara event.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. It's a third bara event. And because what's different about us, well, we're also nephesh animals, but it said we're the image of God. So we have spiritual capacities and the ability to bond with God and form a relationship with God. Now, as far as I know, theistic evolutionists have a couple of ways of dealing with that. Some of them would simply say, look, the bara event refers to the spiritual capacity. So that God took a pre-existing animal, okay, as part of the evolutionary chain, and took that animal and said, okay, you're now going to be Adam and endowed with the spirit capacity, and that's our line. So, again, speaking from a biblical perspective, the Bible doesn't have a lot to say about this question. It's a question for biologists. But I do want to assure everybody that don't let that one challenge your faith, but please don't put it up as a barrier to your atheist friend's faith. Because there are plenty of Christian believers, Spirit-filled, Bible-believing Christians who have credibility in this area who believe that evolution is how God did it. Yeah.
That's something in Genesis 2:7. Has something to speak to that? I know it's maybe beyond the scope of your lab book today.
Okay.
But it says that God formed man from the dust of the earth and breathed into his nostrils. There's a specific event. I mean,
That's
why
also a
whenever
good
the
question.
theistic evolution argument made, I think you have to insert a God event there, more than just a spirit being inserted into
Yeah.
the evolving
Yeah.
creature there, because
Yeah.
God gets his fingernails dirty to make man.
Yeah, there's something going on there. Yeah, so good point. So let me just read it for you so you have it. Genesis 2:7, then the Lord God formed man of dust from the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being. So again, I didn't mention the other possibility for the theistic evolutionist is just simply that, okay, but Adam's, completely separate special event. But there's also another way to look at it, which is that everything on earth is dust, right? I mean, we're all dust of the earth. And in fact, if you go back far enough, we're all dust from stars, from the two previous generations of stars that were before our star. So, so again, you may think that that's a bit of a stretch in the interpretation, and I don't want to debate that, but I do know that as far as theistic evolution goes, it's even been, if you're Catholic, this will, check this out in the Holy See. The evolution has been affirmed in the Holy See as well. And keep in mind that the Pope has an army of theologians, okay, who also brought up these exact same things that you're bringing up. But you're right. That would be one verse that you could point to and say, okay, that's a little bit harder for the theistic evolutionists to deal with. But again, when we look in the whole of Scripture, we're going to find only a handful of verses, really. Whereas, if you look in the physical sciences, and again, the physical sciences are much easier to interpret, okay? The physical sciences, they're just simpler, right? I mean, there's fewer variables. We can do control experiments. We can get numbers out of measurements, numbers with error bars, okay? So the physical sciences, which are much simpler to interpret, there's a lot more statements in the Bible compared to the physical sciences. So, I mean, there were tons here in Genesis 1, but if you look throughout the Scriptures, you'll find a lot of statements about creation, not just in Genesis 1, but in other places. So it's got a lot more to say about physical sciences and biological sciences.
I wouldn't have a problem with the idea that everything created is created from dust.
Mm-hmm.
However, everything else that he creates through the spoken word. And here, he creates, it says, by forming in a different fashion.
Well, that doesn't mean that he wasn't creating the other things out of...
But that's an argument of science.
Well, but absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, right? So if it doesn't say, it just doesn't say, right? I mean, I see
But
your
it does
point.
here, though. It makes an
It does
explicit
here,
point to
but
say
it-
just
we don't get-
2:7 that it-
Yeah, you're right.
So
But
that's
we
why I
don't
say
get...
there's a distinct difference between the two types of creation.
It
And from what
doesn't
we're
tell you how
presenting.
it did the others. Yeah, I mean, I see what you're saying,
Right.
that there's something new here. It's saying, it's giving you details about this, but I think it's I hear your argument, I understand. I think it's a weak argument because we just aren't given detail about the other critters. And why are we given so much detail about Adam? Because he loves us, right?
I agree with
So,
that.
yeah, I mean, I see, yeah. Other questions? Back here, please. Yes, you.
Yeah. Do you believe in literal 6 days of creation?
Okay.
That's one.
Yeah.
That's one thing. I just wanted to use this particular time.
Yeah,
As far as biology is concerned, I used to teach biology in a college.
that's right, you are, yeah.
But in biology, we present fossil records as a good, evidence for evolution to happen over millions, billions
Yeah.
of years. Most important thing is how species are evolving, species as we know them today. As a Christian, we believe that each and every species are created in God in those days, okay? But in evolution, when we tell you that species were evolved over time and they are exposed to various environments, okay, and adaptation. really, there is no good evidence. There is no good evidence for evolution based on fossils. You see, fossils are not complete. We are missing. There are gaps as far as fossils are concerned. So really, we cannot say. So that's just my point.
Fantastic. Okay, so if you have more questions about and you are a believer, right? Am I right? Okay, so if you want to talk to a believer about the biological details, you would have a lot more to say about it. So let me address the literal 6 days thing. Yes, I do believe that it was created, the creation, remember the universe is in verse 1 and the earth is in verse 2. So those are created already before the yawns began. The yawns don't begin till verse 3. And I do believe that what's described after that is 6 literal yawns. Okay? But remember, one of the literal options there is an epic or an era. And again, there's a lot to say about this. So I believe the best match, basically, and you can just get this just looking at the text. You don't have to go to the scientific record to do this. If you just do a word study in Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, I believe it's asking you to use the Yom interpretation. I'm sorry, the era, which is a literal translation of this word Yom. It can literally mean era. Some of the reasons for that is that, if you read Genesis 2, you get a much larger description of what goes on in day 6, right? There's a lot going on. A lot's going on, right? I mean, Adam is formed. He is given tasks to do, okay? He's supposed to take care of the garden. He's supposed to name all the animals, all right? God puts him under general anesthesia to do an operation on him. Okay, he's got to have a little bit of time to recover from that. God forms Eve, he introduces them to each other. And what does Adam say? He doesn't say, oh good, okay? I mean, he's already named all the animals, okay? If you're a biologist, there's a lot of animals out there, okay? So he's spent a long time. I think he's already spent several 24-hour days doing his work that God already assigned him, which was tending the garden and naming all the animals. And what does Adam say when he meets Eve? He says, at last, and really it's much better translated as, at long last. Adam has realized, he has had time to realize that his pet kitty cat, or maybe he chose the dog, I don't know, but that these animals were insufficient companionship for him. Do you think that a few hours was time, given all the other stuff he was assigned to do, was that enough time for him to realize that an animal was insufficient companionship for him? So I think, the details given to us in Genesis 2 tell you that day 6 at least is a long time period. But also, let me show you something else in the passage. Genesis 2:4 is a new telling of the creation account. It says, this is the account of the heavens and the earth when they were created, and the day that the Lord God made earth and heaven. The account word there is the Hebrew toledeth. It means subsequent account. You'll find that a lot in the early parts of Genesis. And what subsequent account, what toledeth means is, here's a retelling, but I know you've already read what was before, okay? So this is a second telling of the beginning of things. And it says, in the day, in the Yom, the single Yom, when the Lord God made earth and heavens. So it's summarizing the whole thing up, the whole shebang as one Yom. Okay? Genesis 1 said 6 Yoms. Genesis 2:4 says 1 Yom. I know of no other way to make 6 Yoms equal 1 Yom other than to say that we have to use the era in meaning of that word. Anyway, there's also a lot more that can be said back and forth. I'm totally happy to go into more afterwards if you want. Question? You've been here for a long time.
Yeah, just trying to put some of this together. You acknowledge that God formed Eve, so I'm just curious, based upon the other view. So when Adam went to sleep, did he just find another life form that kind of resembled human and turned her into Eve, or did he actually make Eve?
Oh, I'm sorry. God made Eve. I mean, according to the passage, God.
I was just based on how you were telling him Adam might have come around.
Oh, you mean like how the theistic evolution is handled?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know. That's a good question.
So he just find another monkey that kind of walked around.
I mean,
I want to shave your legs and
I mean, there's no way you could test that one scientifically, right? But the passage is very explicit about Eve. I mean, I would say, I don't even think theistic evolutionists would go so far as to say that Eve evolved, because it's very explicit that Eve was taken out of Adam.
Why would
and
God
formed-
evolve a man, not a woman?
That's a question for the theistic evolutionists. Yeah, question right here, ma'am.
As a believer, I want to embrace elements of evolution that's in clear, but what do you do theologically with death?
Oh.
The theological, that death came after
Oh, okay.
Adam and Eve, and what evolution would imply that it's
Okay, fantastic. And actually, you don't even have to have an opinion about evolution, just the timescales, right? I mean, if you think of the timescales of such as the Zion with eras, then death would have had to happen before the fall. Now, the question is, what do we mean by death? What kind of death is being described, right? So, check me up on this in Genesis 2, but what God commands for Adam and Eve is you can eat anything you want except the one tree. I mean, they're given lots of freedom and only one rule. And they eat that fruit, and what he told them was that in the day you eat of it, you will die, okay? And so there's something, it's the same Yom word, okay? But what you see as far as how they handle it, there's an immediate death that happens, which is that their relationship with God is immediately damaged because they are immediately hiding, they are immediately ashamed, they are immediately ashamed in front of each other. They know that they're naked, they cover themselves, they hide, they reduce intimacy with themselves and with God. And God kicks them out of the garden. So, and that wasn't their physical death, okay? The consequences that are documented in there are actually spiritual consequences. That was a spiritual death that happened when they rebelled against God. And then, if you put this together, Romans, for example, goes into spiritual death being as a result of sin. That sin reaps death. Well, what kind of death is it reaping? It's reaping spiritual death. So basically, I would argue, theologically speaking, that the death that is the result of sin, the death that's the result of human sin, is spiritual and it's immediate. And if you're a believer, we've all experienced this, okay? When we rebel against God, you feel that relationship with God is damaged and cut. And until you come back, the Holy Spirit draws you back to confession and repentance, and the relationship is restored. So I don't see any contradiction here. I think that the onset of human sin brought in spiritual death. And you can actually see from how God structured this universe that He has always intended this to be a temporary home. And He's always intended it to be a temporary home. Our sun is only gonna burn for a while, okay? So, and the universe is only going to be able to support life for a small time window as far as the universe is concerned. We're coming up against the heat death of the universe, don't worry, not in our lifetimes, but it basically means that He never meant for humans to live here forever. He always meant for us to have a second home, the New Jerusalem. Yeah?
physical death, then you would say,
Yeah.
already present
Right.
and not a result of the fall.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Question here, sir.
Thank you.
And by the way, it's 11:45, so we're technically done. I'm more than happy to stay here and answer more questions.